an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 2, Episode 4, The Flying Forest. In this episode, so it turns out, Alice is really dead. Marina is really dead. And I'm really bummed. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Nicole for commissioning this episode. Check it out. I said thanks to Nicole right away. I didn't forget this time like I do because I'm too interested in talking about the plot of the show. So yeah, thank you, Nicole, very much. This episode, guys, has a real different vibe to it than they have had. And I can't totally put my finger on what it is. I'm sort of waiting to see if by the end of discussing it with you all, if I can figure it out why there is, I don't know if it's the plotting is better, if the writing is better, but this episode overall felt higher quality to me than the show has felt thus far. And the show has never felt like bad quality. It's just felt like frustrating. You know, there have been a lot of sort of tropes that I am not a fan of. And I really haven't had an issue overall, even when there's like moments that I disagree with what a character is doing, other than the rape issue, that I've been like, oh God, what are they thinking with doing it this way? But this episode felt, for me, really meaty. There's a lot to like kind of dig into here. And I appreciate that I feel this way about the same episode that confirms to me that Marina and Alice are actually dead. Now, I say actually dead with an asterisk because, as we all know, in fantasy, people are often never really, really dead. Like, there's a thing that could bring somebody back. I mean, we have Marina come back for a second, but I don't feel that's anything. But, you know, who knows what could happen. So I'm not going to discount entirely the idea of their return at some point, because maybe there's ghosts here, or maybe they can travel to another realm where they see them again. But as of right now, that's the best I can do in terms of really nailing down why this episode felt more grown up. And I think it is just because they decided they weren't going to walk this back. They are going in on the fact that main characters can die. And it doesn't look like they're going to try and take a back door out of this to make it easier because they know people are going to be mad that, you know, the ensemble cast is being broken up. I totally understand why certain shows don't want to do this. You know, you have a contract with an actor, or it turns out a character resonates with the viewing audience a lot more than you really expected them to. And you realize that, like, this character is actually a huge draw to the show. And I don't want to, because in the end, TV shows are about making money, right? They're a business. So as much as people try and like sort of say, it's all about money, man, and act like that's really like they act like this is some sort of revelation. Of course it's about money. That's what this is. People are getting paid to do this work. So I can't fault shows sometimes for making choices that are a little bit pandering or, you know, just fan service, because they need to be able to keep writing these. And there's only, you know, so many people who watch their show and they want to keep those people happy. But there is something to be said for having the guts to follow through on the death of a character. And it's something that I have come to really respect as someone who does what I do for a living the number of times that we think a character is gone and isn't, it's failed to be any sort of surprise. You know, it's turned into something else where if a character is actually dead, that's the surprise. A character that genuinely doesn't come back, that's shocking. And otherwise, it's completely predictable. Somebody comes back. Oh, they come back as a ghost. Oh, you were able to bring them back to life. Oh, we went into another dimension and they're alive there, the double of them. Oh, we went into like the spirit world and got involved in a thing there. And it's not even that I am completely against that in concept, but it always feels a little bit like a cheat to me, because usually those moments, even if they don't last, even if the character does wind up saying goodbye from there, it's still used as an opportunity to give characters the opportunity to say goodbye to each other that they didn't have in the moment of their death. And you know what? Guess what, guys? You don't get to say goodbye a whole lot of the time. A whole lot of the time. So while I understand in some ways it's a wish fulfillment, being able to have a kind of closure with somebody that you care about, there is something really bold and brave in a way that's sort of bleak about allowing a character like Quentyn to wake up and find out she's gone, and that's it. And of course, throughout this episode, I fully expected him to be intending to try and bring her back to life. When he said that's what he was after, it was just like, yeah, obviously. Anytime that there's a character in a supernatural TV show that dies, the next episode is often going to be about searching for a way to bring them back to life. And occasionally that will work. And occasionally they find out that there is no such option. This is something that happened, on Buffy as well. And they will have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to either cause further suffering to the person that they're trying to say goodbye to by forcing them back into life, or if they want to remember this person as somebody else because what they bring back is not who they are trying to get back, or they realize that bringing them back in the way that they intend isn't actually enough. That really what they want is for that person to not have gone through what they went through. And that's just changing time. And that's a whole other thing. Occasionally it's turning back time. But I think the maturity of having these characters coping with this, the way that they are so far, is what has struck me. Death is one of those things that until you have gone through something where you have lost a person that's really close to you, you can, in theory, understand it, but there's simply no way that you can really grasp how irrational a lot of our reactions to death are. And even after experiencing it, there are still times where I have trouble because I don't have the same sort of belief system that a lot of people do. A lot of you may have listened to the Leftovers episode that I did with Rashawn, where I was just kind of like, I don't understand our fascination with like preserving bodies and buying expensive caskets and doing all of this stuff when the person is gone. And it's just, that's, for me, all of that stuff is using objects in our world to avoid facing the fact that this person has vanished in a way that we can't ever really understand. And it's a distraction. But I also have to recognize that it's very real and very important to some people. So there are just so many different perspectives. And because so much of this episode is taken up with this like kind of quest that Quentyn is taking, he doesn't get a lot of time to really mourn. And I'll be on the lookout for that. because I think he needs that. And it seems like things are moving so quickly and in such a way. It might be easier for the writers to not allow him to have that. But, and honestly, sometimes it's not fun to watch as a viewer. Grief, frustration, unresolved anger, as somebody on the outside watching, it can be tedious to sort of like go through that with a character. And I didn't have the patience for it that I do now at one time. But at this point, I'm kind of wanting it because Quentyn has felt really one-dimensional in a lot of ways. You know, he has been the quintessential, pun intended, protagonist boy. The guy who is an outsider, picked on, likes a girl who doesn't really like him back, but still wants to be friends. He has a lot of like family baggage, which is not resolved, I ought to add. Like, you know, his father is still out there somewhere with cancer, apparently. And he is just, he has been sort of flat. The guy who knows all about Fillory and is obsessed with this thing that turns out to, shockingly, be totally true, which of course it is. And this consequence, this is something more. I mean, imagine if Harry had lost Hermione in the first, like within the first 3 or 4 books. How much that would have changed everything about who he is and the kinds of risks he's willing to take and the way he understands the gravity of choices he makes. I'm very, very curious what the writers are going to do with this. Because this isn't, you know, main characters dying is not only a tough thing to do in the best of times, but frequently the main character is still as much a side character as they can get away with. And for example, I would have expected if you told me that somebody dies at the end of the episode, I would have thought it would be Margo. I would have thought somebody who is like close enough to the core group that we will miss her for sure, but far enough out in the tangent area that it would feel sort of safe. And Alice, because of her relationship to Quentyn, but also because of her abilities, was beginning to feel like a central top 3 character. So this is a pretty big deal. So anyway, you know, this might all be rendered moot. This whole thing that I spent 10 minutes talking about may turn out to be nothing because she just winds up back to life next episode. Who fucking knows? But as of right now, it's pretty intense. Like, Quentyn at the start of this episode is getting his, like, basically bicep replaced with wood. It's crazy looking. His forearm and hand are still his, but from elbow up to shoulder, it is a totally, like, enchanted piece of wood, and it's really bananas looking. Meanwhile, Elliot and Margo are outside with their crowns on, watching. And, of course, Margo has to comment because one of the doctors is a centaur. And she says, I know we're supposed to be being serious right now, but that doctor has the biggest dick. And Elliot looks unwilling to sort of, like, say anything, but finally has to nod because he can't pretend that he did not also notice. And she tells him that it's time to go. And we find out later, Quentyn takes 3 weeks to get back on his feet. It's quite a while. They have almost a month pass here. Now, obviously, I don't know what the lineup time-wise is between Fillory and our world. It does not feel like 3 weeks has passed for Julia. But it's been a couple days, I'd say, right? Like 3 days. Because she's had to keep the body in this, like, frozen spell. And during those 3 weeks, a lot of shit comes up. Everybody is, like, there's a lot going on here, actually, because of the fact that kings and queens of Fillory have been under this curse that has caused them to kill one another previously. Basically, everybody's sort of low-key waiting for this crew to die too. Even though they went through the curse and they all like have managed to get through, it's unreasonable to expect everybody outside of their direct circle to understand that it was a curse and know that things are going to be different this time around. So the feeling of not having any leaders has not gone away because of their appearance. It's simply them waiting for the other shoe to drop. And in the meantime, they have to humor this king and queen as best they can while being aware that this is only temporary and that these rulers will be in the rearview mirror soon, which is a really fucking awful situation for everyone involved. Obviously Margo and Elliot being treated like any day now you guys are going to be out of here. So we're really not that invested in either listening to what you tell us to do or getting attached to you as people and respecting you. And also, it's terrible for the people of Fillory who have just had to endure this sort of like revolving door of kings and queens with no real progress being made towards fixing the problems that they have. And the problems are very real. There is this issue with the spring, and they have been trying to like use a filtration system to get it working again, to make sure that the water is pure enough to continue to fuel the wellspring. But it's not enough. Like, the contamination is very severe. And obviously Ember thought he was helping, and to be honest, he probably was helping, because the beast would have drunk up and then would probably have been able to resist their attack. And they managed to kill the beast because of what Ember did, I think. But there are long-lasting consequences to that, which blow. Also, there's the issue of, they're talking about expecting you to vanish or go mad. There are stirrings of rebellion in the southern orchard, and refusal to pay the crown's taxes. To which Margo says, you know who loves paying taxes? People with broken legs. And I really had to be like, Margo, honey, I understand the impulse. But they were literally starving to death a very short time ago. And might still be. Because, again, I don't know how time works here. I don't know how long it takes for fertilizer to bear fruit. But they could still barely be making it. And expecting people to pay when they don't have it is foolish. And you can't get blood from a stone, and et cetera, et cetera. So she's out here just trying to like knuckle down, like people aren't cooperating because they just don't want to. And it's more, people aren't cooperating because they've tried to a couple times and it's never worked out, and now they're starving. And it's just frustrating that it doesn't seem like she really appreciates the situation. And I don't know how much Elliot has really told her, but he feels like he's in a totally different world right now. And Margo, like, really, she's the only one in this scene that's talking to these advisors at all. Like, again, Elliot is staring off into the middle distance and only chimes in to say that he wants to have a statue built to honor his fallen queen. And they all are, of course, like, dude, you know how expensive that's going to be? And he doesn't care. He's like, find the money. You'll figure it out. But it needs to be like 100 feet high. And Margo, at this point, is just like, all right, guys, you need to leave us alone. And at one point, when she says, can you give us a moment? Nobody moves. And finally, she says, get the fuck out. And it should be noted that she's wearing a pretty intense black lace gown with these, like, sort of epaulettes on them that really do give her an evil queen sort of vibe. And I'm here for it. You know, like, as much as I disapprove of what she's doing in general, her methods, it's pretty fun. And I just enjoy her. So yeah, she's just like, dude, we can't be spending the little money we have on something that is for essentially like, what does she call it? I can't remember. Hold on. I'm finding the wording of it because I liked the way that she said it. So that's the plan, huh? Blow all our cash on sappy nonsense. That's what it is. Bankrupt the kingdom. And he says, we have to do something. Alice was our friend. And she says, no, she wasn't. Alice was a package deal. She came with Quentyn. And Elliot is very uncomfortable with her saying it in these terms, which I understand because it's ugly, but it feels true to me. I think Alice considered them friends. I think she was angry at them for what happened with Quentyn, for sure. But I still think, despite that, everything they went through, she'd consider them friends. Whereas these two consider each other friends and consider everybody else to be people who are around. Does that make sense? And Elliot is clearly struggling with that more than Margo, who seems to have kind of come to terms with the way that she sees the world and the fact that she is just sort of doesn't form attachments that way. But I have to be honest. I am similar to Margo in this way. I tend to make one or two really close friends, and those are my friends, and everyone else are visitors. And, you know, it's not that I don't care about them at all, but the way that I think about them and feel about them and their involvement in my life is removed in a way that other people are not. And I kind of sympathize with her because she's trying to be as honest about it as she can, and she's just coming across as really cold-hearted, and that is the danger when you're like this, is that it can seem like you're cold-hearted. And the truth is so far from it that when you are like that, the people that you do become attached to become so meaningful to you that you would literally scratch the eyes out of the faces of anybody who tried to fuck with those people. You are not cold-hearted. You just choose where you put your energy very carefully. And that's how she is. And she's being a lot more bald about it here. In some ways, I think that is a kind of a self-preservation tactic. It's a means of distancing herself so that she doesn't have to cope with the emotion of losing somebody that was close-knit in the group that was handling what was going on. But in other ways, I think she's being pretty honest here. And I could see this being something that a lot of people find a little repellent. But I kind of understood. And she's telling him, you need to pay attention to what the fuck is going on here. There is an entire country depending on you. And we need to get it together. And he's kind of like, come on, what is this all of a sudden? And she's like, dude, I am also wearing a crown in case you don't see this. I am taking this as seriously as I can. And he's like, yeah, but you can leave. You can go and do whatever you want with your life. I don't have that luxury, and I don't belong here. And I feel like I jumped into something way too quickly that I thought was, he says, it was so much simpler when there was just one gigantic evil dick trying to kill us. But now we're just, and she says, grown-ups. And he looks at her with this mystified expression and says, how did this happen? Yo, guys, this is the thing. Like, this is a perfect metaphor for becoming an adult. When you're in high school, it's get to college. When you're in college, it's graduate college. Oftentimes, it's get to grad school, or it's get a good job. And then live. There aren't the same kinds of milestones. There aren't the same sorts of, I just get here and I feel like I've really moved on to the next stage in my life. No, you have to invent them, and they will mean something to you and you alone, because nobody else is going to share the exact same goals or plans. So it won't be a group of you agreeing on a destination and going there together. It will be you choosing a thing and being alone. And frequently, the destination is no such thing. The destination is a type of living. And that's the worst part of all. You can't accomplish living a certain way. You can live it. The end. There is no finish line except dying. So that's fucking daunting. And when you are a goal-oriented person who is used to stages of life being broken down into manageable, bite-sized, easily digestible pieces, it's really abhorrent. And that's where they're at. They have reached the finish line in terms of taking the beast down. And now they just have to fucking balance a budget. Now they have to manage a country. They need to get accountants in here. They need to start making day-to-day decisions on minutia that feels so silly after what they just went through, but isn't. It feels totally trivial, but this is what keeps everyone alive. And y'all, I feel like that's the most relatable shit. So this is when Margo comes up with a loophole, and she pulls out the button to get back to break bills, and she goes and gets some stuff to make a golem of Elliot. And I have to ask, the 4 thrones, are they still cursed? If you sat on them again, would you be reinfected with whatever that is? Or did them sitting once and surviving break it? I'm curious, because they don't sit in them in this episode. And I don't know if that's simply a choice because of the story, or if they are avoiding them because they are dangerous. One would think if they are still dangerous, they'd have been thrown away and we'd have built some new thrones, but who knows? So we go back to our world, and we see Julia finding Katy and rescuing her kind of from this crack house. And it turns out that I think she was doing meth. Is that what she said? But yeah, she is trying to get some help again. And I really feel like... Oh, okay. Hugabug says, I think if it was a new group of kings and queens, it may reactivate, but I think the thrones are safe for them. Matthew says, I don't think it's ever stated outright, but I assume the curse is basically broken. Yeah, Hugabug, I kind of assume the same as you, but then I think about it and I'm like, it would be really fucked up of them to know these are cursed thrones and keep them anyway. They really should just replace them, because it's highly likely that one of them will die and somebody else is going to need to sit there eventually. But yeah, so Julia is getting Katy and, needing her help on figuring out what it is that's written on Marina's arm, because she is aware that Marina left them a message, some way to proceed. And I have to say that as much as I understand Julia needing to do what she needs to do and the urgency of the situation, I also can't help but be like, man, you are just really willing to drag anybody into this, aren't you? And even though one of them just wound up dead very shortly ago, you're still, yikes. But honestly, what choice does she have? Meanwhile, the dean is trying to cast with his hands that have only just healed, And he casts a spell on his globe that is supposed to make clouds appear around it like the atmosphere of Earth. And all of a sudden, it begins to light up and it explodes. and he is really fucking irritated. And he meets with the other professor. What is her name? And he's like, I have had nothing but problems. I thought it was because of my hands, but it's getting worse, not better. So let's see. You haven't had any other problems with your casting? She asks him first. I'm just making sure that I cover this all because I am trying to figure out where this could have started. But yeah, she's like got some of those like clear glass, like I think the things that you sort of look through to examine. And she explains to him about how she's had some brownouts because what she thinks because of Xanax. But she's getting like 4 or 5 a day. And he is starting to wonder, I think, if there isn't something going on with break bills at large, maybe, which that would suck. I mean, this is supposed to be probably linked to the wellspring because that's where the magic comes from, right? They've talked about the Fillory wellspring is the source of magic, and if anything were to happen to that, then that is the end of magic in our world as well. So I feel like that's what's happening. But I don't know if they're aware of what went on in Fillory. So I guess later on, once Elliot comes and speaks with him, he might get some insight here. But Professor Lipson, thank you, Hugabug. So Margo is in one of the classrooms and she's trying to find some information on making this golem. And Penny comes crashing through, and he has been like in a couple of worlds that didn't even have any oxygen. So he is a bit fucked up right now. And I had forgotten that he doesn't know what happened. She says, did we kill the beast? And she says, we did. And he looks really happy and starts like laughing with relief. But then she has to tell him. And she starts off with Quentyn's pretty banged up. And then Alice was hurt a lot worse, Penny. And I was like, you really shouldn't frame it like that because it makes it sound like she might still be alive. But then immediately follows up with, she died. And Penny clearly wasn't ready and just gets up and walks away. Like, yeah, it sucks to be the bearer of that kind of news. Back to Elliot. He's laying in bed and he's reading all of these petitions and feeling very overwhelmed. And his wife comes in and is acting kind of weird. And she asks if she can ask for something. And he's like, yeah, okay, sure. And she says, I know I'm not precisely the type you'd most likely choose. And I wasn't so experienced when we were first together. But you're so great at it. You're huge and it's so good. And can you just, I don't know how to politely ask you to fuck me. And I love the look he has in his eyes when she says this because he isn't even just like, oh, all right, sweetie. He's got like a tender sort of affectionate look where he's sort of, it's almost like he sees himself in her for a second where he's like, oh, I remember being this horny and not knowing how to get it. Sweetie, yeah, of course I'll fuck you. Don't worry. It's kind of adorable, weirdly. But then Margo busts in and tells him about her plan. And everything is a really weird, like, series of overlaps from here on out. So she has gotten all of the stuff together and they managed to make this other version of himself so that he can travel in his golem body to our world without anything going terribly wrong, right? And it's weird how his consciousness is in there. I don't even remember exactly how they do this, but the body is like fresh and undamaged. So even his sense of smell is heightened because he hasn't fucked it up by snorting a bunch of coke. And I can't help but wonder what that's like. Just getting like senses back that you kind of like dulled in one way or another. That must be pretty amazing. And they walk in on a party in which Todd has suddenly become the guy. And Elliot is very angry at the fact that he has been replaced and that it's Todd that replaced him. Like, both of these things are bad. He can't believe that it's happened so easily, and he can't believe that it happened with this fucking guy. And this leads to, and I'm speeding through this encounter a little bit, but this leads to him sort of sulking in a corner, trying to come up with a perfect cocktail so that he can retake his crown as party king, when he encounters this dude, super fine, very flirty, and they decide to go off together. And he's a little bit weird at first because he's like, I'm married. And the guy is like, well, where is she? And he's like, on another planet, basically. And the guy is like, come on, this hardly counts then. And what Elliot does is he starts to sleep with this guy. And in the middle of foreplay, he kind of like glitches over and is also having sex and foreplay with his wife. And it's like a doubling up that at first makes him really nervous and freaks him out. But gradually he gets pretty into it. And I would imagine that that has to be really intense, right? Like, I would think any orgasm you had, you're having basically two at once. And that has to be kind of insane, provided that the sex goes at the same pace on both versions of your body. But yeah, he is like managing to fuck his wife at the same time as he's having sex with this dude. And it's funny because like later on he's talking to the dean and he's like, you know, I can't keep doing this. And I'm like, you can't? Because this seems pretty awesome. Honestly, this seems kind of like best case scenario. You get to have your cake and eat it too, and then eat it again. Like, come on. But I understand that it's just a lot to deal with, because any time that she sort of summons him back because she wants sex, if he's not having sex at that point already, it's going to fuck up the connection, apparently, that he has. So we'll get back to his conversation with the dean, but let's talk about Julia and Katy. So they're talking about, first Katy comes out. She's just had like her first shower in ages. And Julia says, I made you a sandwich half an hour ago and then I ate it. So apparently she's just been in there for a really long time. And she asks, how are you feeling? And Katy says, better. Nap, seeing you alive. Magic methadone. And I'm really curious what that means, because obviously whatever she was doing, it was like other people were doing it as well, and it's all magic. But I wonder how that works. And she, how Julia just found her by asking around. She's turning tricks was what she was doing. And Julia's like, I'm not judging you, BT dubs. And Katy's like, no, I'm judging myself. And Julia doesn't really have anything to say to that. And she says, I feel really bad because you pretty much saved my life. And I just ran away. I thought that I could leave and then come back and help you, but I didn't come back. I just ran. And I just feel really, really shitty about that. To which Julia is like, look, even if you hadn't intended to stay away, you would have been able to do nothing. This was a literal god. He killed 5 people in the space of like 15 seconds. Like, what? There was nothing you could do. But now there definitely is something you could do. And she unwraps Marina's body. And she has been kept in this sort of like stasis with a freezing spell so that they can bring her back and her body won't have rotted. And she has a like series of magical symbols carved into her arm that she left. Hopefully that she left. Now here's the thing. Did she? Because we're going into this assuming that she knew she was going to die and managed to leave a message for them in her flesh. But let us not forget that Reynard is a trickster. And it's highly possible that this was not Marina who left this. And that he's leading them to something else. I don't know what that would be. But I'm just saying I'm very suspicious. And I wish that it seemed as if Julia were also suspicious. But she says she left this for a reason, a message or a code. And when Katy sees it, she's like, oh, yeah, no, I actually know what that is. That's like a call code for a book from the library. And once they find the book, it turns out to be and it's really cool the way this is because like Julia has to break into Break Bills. And in order to show Katy what she's doing, she has to use this like one of those necklaces, the best friends necklaces. It says like "love you, bitch" or something on it. And each of them has to wear a half, and she's like holding up, Katy is holding up a mirror while Julia looks around in the library, and she can see what it is that Julia sees. And they wind up finding the book, and it turns out to have like essentially a LoJack on the back of it, which means that she cannot remove it from the library. So she has to go into basically the restricted section, and the actual book is all handwritten, really, really intricate. And it's not something that it would be easy for her to sit down and copy. It would take days. So she needs to find her a place to hide so that she can sit down and do this without anybody noticing. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit here because this is all mixed in together, and I'm going to talk about Quentyn last. Sorry, guys. I'm just like scanning ahead on the video here as I'm watching it. Okay, here we go. Julia intends to hide in the house where the physical kids live. I'm trying to remember if there's a name for this house. Is there, guys? And Margo wants to know what the fuck she's doing here because nobody else really knows who Julia is. It's just her bad luck that Margo happened to be here at this point. And they have an interesting conversation. She tells her Alice died killing your little friend Martin, and Quentyn was almost ripped in half. You have the balls to come here? And Julia says, if you all had fucking listened to me, both of them would have been dead, Reynard and the Beast, and none of this would have happened. And she says, Quentyn should have left you in your little hedge hole, trading rim jobs for spells. And obviously has this superiority about it, which Julia calls her out on. And she says, I think I didn't get my friends killed. And Julia says, yeah, you don't have friends. You have people that are so afraid of you, they'd rather be on your side. And when she says that, you can see it hit home pretty hard. Like, Margo gets a look on her face. Like she hadn't been able to really put words to what she was feeling when she talked to Elliot about Alice not being their friend. But when Julia says it like that, she's like, oh my God, that's totally what was happening there, actually. And it's not all that was happening, but it's certainly a part of it. There's no way to deny that, you know? And Julia says, and there's a difference. And she says, well, you have no one, you know, trying to get her, and you deserve no one. Julia says, I don't expect you to care because this doesn't directly affect your hair or your social life. But since you let Renard free, he has murdered over 12 women. And this book might be my last shot at killing him. And that, again, also sort of slows Margo down. And she has this box that she brings over with a blank notebook. And she says, this book's blank. Put yours in the box and wait for them to mate. The baby should be a pretty decent Xerox of the original. And she just walks away and doesn't say anything. So she agrees to help, but she, can't argue anymore because she has low-key been bested by Julia. I have had a lot of sympathy for Julia through this season, or this season and a half. But of course, I've loved Margo. And seeing the two of them kind of go back and forth like that, I thought was really great. I want to see the two of them face to face more because they're both really willing to go for the fucking jugular. And each of them needs that. Like, that's part of how I determine other people being my friend is if they are willing to really do that with me sometimes, because I need it. I am not somebody who responds to subtle passive aggressive hints about, well, maybe you shouldn't do this or that. I always sort of am just like, yeah, whatever. But that was a thing that really stopped me in my tracks with Owen a couple of times. He would just straight up call me out on things that I was doing that I kind of knew I was doing, but didn't really stop long enough to think about too much. And he would just be like, hey, I feel like you're being really manipulative right now and I don't like it. And I would have to stop and be like, oh shit, no, you're right. I'm definitely being really manipulative. My bad. Okay. And they're both strong, stubborn women who kind of have to have somebody slap them across the face for them to stop and look at their own actions sometimes. So, cool. I liked it. So this leads to all the spell, which also includes putting the book in the fire. So they only get the one chance at bringing Marina back to life, and she will not be back to life for very long. Unsurprisingly, Katy isn't entirely on board initially and has to be convinced because she thinks they're bringing her back to life, doing her a favor. And this is the woman who killed her fucking mom. And Julia has to be like, trust me, it's not a favor and she's not going to be back for that long. We just need to get some information from her that she clearly felt was important enough to leave us this message. So Marina comes back and is absolutely panicked and flipping out, and doesn't know what's happening. And Julia tries to tell her, you had a message that you wanted to send me. You really need to, we don't have much time. You've got to tell me. And Marina says, you don't understand. You don't know where I was. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there. And Julia sails right past that, which I don't think I could have done. I gave Julia a lot of shit last episode for not staying on task and murdering Reynard immediately, and so he winds up getting away. But I'll confess that what she says here about you don't know where I was, I don't want to go back, would have straight up derailed the whole thing for me. And I would have been like, wait, where were you? Oh my God. What? Oh, is there hell? I completely would have gotten sidetracked and never would have asked the pertinent question. So good on you, Julia, for fucking staying on task this time. And she says, you are the strongest person I ever met and you need to pull it together now. And I need you to tell me tell me about the thing that killed you. And Marina calms down a little and says, you can stop him. It's possible, but you need to do it. And she says, okay, what do I need to do? There was a girl, 40 years ago, she banished Reynard from Earth. That's where he was until you summoned him. That's where he was until you brought him back. And she's kind of low-key screaming, and it seems like she's about to say something else, and she just passes out again and is dead. Finally, completely dead. And that's as much information as they get not a lot to work with here. I don't know what to think about this, you know? And again, there is every possibility that this isn't actually true and Reynard is setting them up. So who knows? So let's go to Quentyn. He wakes up and is really horrified at the fact that, again, Alice is really dead, because I think he kind of hoped that they would have been able to find a way to save her while he was out. But instead, there's a pretty heavy note from Elliot. And it says, "We've been waiting a long time for you. We buried Alice in the garden so that she would always be nearby. And here are some of her things. We hope that you wake up soon. Please wake up." And it is, you know, very sort of spare and all the more emotional and moving a note because of that. And as he's standing there, Penny comes over, hearing him crying. And it is the wrong person for Quentyn to encounter when he is in this state. Like, this is not only somebody that he has just had a long running back and forth, like, bitter relationship with, but this is also the guy who fucked Alice when she was angry at him. And so, of course, he's like holding that against him too. And he tries to tell him, like, it sucks about Alice. And Quentyn is like, "Sucks? Are you serious? That's the word you're going to use right now?" And they just have a back and forth here, which ends with Quentyn telling him to go the fuck away. Penny does so and goes to see a doctor about his hands being enspelled. And he's like, "That's a really fucking bad curse. Like, low-key, you just need to cut those hands off. And I gotta tell you, I'm not willing to do it because it could infect me. I don't even want to be anywhere near those things." Like, and there's a moment with this guy, because he's a centaur, where he kind of seems distracted for a minute while he's talking to Elliot. And then it turns out that he's taking a shit. And this woman runs up and sweeps up his droppings into a little wastepan. And he looks down and says, "You're welcome." And I was just like, oh my God, I hate you so much. This actor looks super familiar and I cannot place him. I don't remember what I've seen him in. I wish that Netflix had the Amazon X-ray, because that would be super helpful. But yeah, so the whole thing with Quentyn, like, he sees this creature. He's out in the woods, or he's out at the hospital wing, I guess. I don't really know what to call it. But he had seen this thing. And when he mentions it to the nurse who's taking care of him, she says, "Oh, you've seen the white lady." And he's like, "I'm sorry, white lady?" Because the woman handling his shoulder is black. And I love that they keep bringing that up. It's because, yeah. And she says, "You are fortunate she offered yourself to some centaur's sight while you happened to be watching." And apparently he remembers hearing about this in his, like, Fillory readings, because that seems to really mean something to him. And this woman is painting over the wood of his shoulder and tells him that this is skin. And it won't change what's underneath, but hopefully will help him forget. So this is very convenient, so that from now on, it will look like he's totally uninjured and we can all forget about it. And makeup doesn't have to constantly work on his shoulder. Meanwhile, Penny has reached the end of his tether, because his hands try to choke him to death in the middle of the night. And he comes over to Quentyn and tells him, "You are about to cut my hands off. FYI, that's what you're about to do." And Quentyn acts like he can get this done. But when it comes down to it, and I sympathize, he just can't quite make it happen. Guys, like, I don't think I could either. Oh, cutting off somebody's hands. I'd be so paranoid that I'd, like, completely miss aim and wind up cutting off like their whole arm below the elbow or something, and finally he says something like, well, I'm sorry, I just don't love blood. And the way that Penny gets this done is he says, just fucking, I knew I couldn't count on you. You are so fucking pathetic, you floppy-haired, limp-dicked dork. Fucking no wonder Alice couldn't get off on you, and that's what does it. And Elliot just Quentyn takes one off and then runs around the other side and has to chop like a bunch of times, and they're both screaming as he does it. It is honestly hilarious. Like, I appreciate that we don't have to see blood spurting. We don't have to see too much. But the two of them both screaming, I could not stop laughing. So the next morning, Quentyn he has to do some physical therapy, and he decides that he's going to do some archery and get a little bit better with that. And what's his face? Penny comes up to him with his stubs where his hands should be. And Quentyn tells him, so, I need your help. I helped you. You're going to help me. We're going to catch this white lady that I saw yesterday who gives wishes. To which, appropriately, Penny says, let's hunt the white lady. A guy like me could get killed for saying something like that. Absolutely fucking not. And the only thing that convinces him is Quentyn suddenly being like, she could give you your hands back. And that makes Penny stop and go, fuck, you just found like the one thing you could say to convince me to do this. And he asks, well, what's in it for you? And he says, I'm going to ask her to bring Alice back to life. So they wind up in the woods, the flying forest, which it turns out they had both expected the forest to be like midair. But it turns out that the forest, there's just some sort of fume in there that causes them both to get really stoned and forget who they are and why they're here, and walk in circles over and over and over again until eventually Quentyn realizes that that's what's happening, that they're going in circles, and says, no, you know what? We need to go this way, actually. And they wind up out in this meadow, and because they're out of whatever gas or pollen or who knows what that was, they both manage to come back to themselves and remember what it is that they're doing. And Quentyn collapses for a second and remembers Alice. Like, he had forgotten his grief for a second, and it just all crashes down on him at the same time. And it is an actual sweet moment where Penny says, listen, before, when your wards were slipping, I know how you're feeling. I could hear the things that you were saying to yourself, and you just can't do this to yourself, man. You have to think about Alice, think about the fact that she needs you, I need you, and we need to get this done, and you got to get it together. And he nods and is like, okay. So they wind up going out into the woods and succeed in shooting this thing, which is like a fawn, kind of. It's a weird sort of it's like, would you call it a fawn? Because she's got like goat legs, but also has like a whole other, I think she is, right? Like, her legs are kind of goaty, but they're also more human than goaty than I expected them to be, which I suspect is probably just for the ease of design and not having to do too much CGI, probably. But yeah, she can sense that Quentyn is part wood and comes up to him and knocks on it. And he's just like, could you not do that, please? I'd appreciate it. And she finally just gets to the point and is like, all right, what is it? What is it that you want to take from me, essentially? You already have magic. You already have a crown. What is it? And this is when Penny has to sort of chime in and be like, yo, don't forget about me. I also get a thing. And Quentyn says something like, you can go after me. And he's like, no. We each get a wish. We're splitting. You're not just like doing me a favor. Once they get that settled, he asks her to bring Penny back, or to bring Alice back. And she says, I'm sorry, but that's not something I can do. That's past my power. And I appreciate that he doesn't argue with her when she says that she can't. It's not even like, he says, what do you mean? And gets like aggressive for a second. But then she's like, seriously, dude, everybody has their limits to their magic. And that's just not like bringing somebody back to life. That's not something that I can do. She's gone. And Penny has to like get him to lower his bow because he's about to start crying and shoot her again. But I appreciate that he just accepts it and sort of backs off. I have no doubt he'll try another method, but for now. And then Penny says, I want my hands back. And she's like, okay, now see that I can do. And it's not painless, I should mention. He is like screaming as these things grow back. But yeah, eventually she puts a muffling sort of spell on him so that you don't have to listen to him screaming, Quentyn, because it's getting really annoying. And she says, so come on, Quentyn, you need to come up with another wish. What can I give you that will soothe your shade? She uses the same word that the beast had used. And he says, there's only what I can take away. Or she says, there's only what I could take away. I could take away your memories of Alice so that you wouldn't hurt, you wouldn't remember. And he chooses not to. And she says, you're wiser than you appear, which I did appreciate because I kind of wondered if they were going to do that. And I was like, how are they? What? There's no way that works because then he's going to be immediately around people who talk about Alice all the time. And that's just going to fuck things up. So, and yeah, she's like, no matter how far you run from it, that pain would have caught up with you anyway. So you're smart. Isn't there anything else? And he finally says, everything I've ever wanted, I've got. Magic is real, and it can fix everything except what I need, which, yeah, about the cancer with his dad as well. I loved a girl, and then she died. I dreamed of Fillory, and it's real. And I wanted to be like Martin Chatwin, who found who turned out to be a fucking monster. And then just kind of is like, you know what? I want to go home. And the end of the episode is just him putting his quiver of arrows into the trash, which that is the least believable thing about this entire show, that there would ever be a New York public trash can that was that clean and empty. That was the real magic, my friends. The real magic was the trash cans we found along the way. But yeah, I can't help but wonder what everybody must think of this dude popping up. I mean, probably just that he's cosplaying or something. And he walks off into the crowd, and I have no idea what he's going to do. Is he ever going to go back to break bills? Like, what's next? Meanwhile, I've run out of time. I'm way over. Well, the conversation with the dean and Elliot can be summed up as Elliot has to decide what to do, and he doesn't really have many options. He has to choose the one life. He got to come back, have his last hurrah with some dude, go to a party. That's it. So he has to go back and fulfill his duties and be responsible. Good luck with that, buddy. All right. Oh yeah. God, Nikki's in the chat, guys, saying my stuff touchers. I forgot about that. Oh, Huggabug, the Mushroom Forest in the 10th Kingdom. I've just been watching that again. Totally. Exactly. Jessie says her other name is the Winter's Doe. I prefer that. I wish they'd have been saying that, but White Lady is good comic relief. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for coming and hanging out with me. Thank you again to Nicole for commissioning this. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.